Alright, welcome back to another Masters of the Universe Classics Director's Commentary with me, Scott, ToyGuru Neitlich, brand manager of pretty much, I would say, 95% of the line. Before we jump into Man-at-Arms, a very quick announcement. Lots of people have been asking me for a video about kind of the decline and fall of MattyCollector.com and, what happened when I went away, when I left Mattel, how the brand just kind of like vanished overnight. Well, maybe not overnight, but, it didn't exactly keep going. And I'm definitely going to do that video, talking about some of the brands we were going to do, some of the line extensions, some of the really cool items that were planned. And I will do that as soon as I hit 1,000 subscribers. So if you are not subscribing, please do so and help unlock that content. You won't get any more mail. It just means the videos will show up in your feed. So, everybody wins. So come on, sub up and we'll get there together. Okay, back to Man-at-Arms. So Man-at-Arms, one of the original 8-back figures, and he was planned from the beginning to be one of the first figures in Classics. And yeah, he really came with a lot of stuff. We had to kind of jam him in the package there with all of his accessories, and he even had the first secret accessory, which I'll get to that in a few moments. But he was, as mentioned in the past, part of the original rollout, which were 2-packs. He was going to be paired with Zodak as the last of the 2-packs, and what I thought was the last figures we'd ever get to. Who knew the line would get so big? The reason being is that they had the shared parts. They used the basic Buck bodies, and I'll do a video about Buck bodies soon and what that means. But basically, figures like Squeeze here used an original body. He didn't share common parts, so we weren't exactly going to go out with Squeeze for one of the first figures. The original Bucks followed the same thing as the vintage line. You had your sort of buff human male Buck that was used for characters like He-Man, and even Skeletor actually used that part. You had what was called the Beastie Buck, which included Skeletor's arms and Stratos. That's Stratos' body, Beastman's body. Excuse me, not Skeletor's. And then, of course, you had what was called the Reptile Buck. This is where you had Skeletor. So you had the 3-pronged feet, and you had the little sharp things coming off the wrists. That was all part of the Reptile Buck. So looking at Man-at-Arms here on the original cross-sell, he used basically the human Buck. Some characters mixed and matched, like Zodak. He had like the furry, hairy chest and the reptile legs, but Man-at-Arms used 100% the human Buck with a new head and armor. And this is how we were able to sort of mimic the original rollout. Merman, also part of the original rollout, but he needed some more parts. He needed a neck piece, and he needed original arms to do sort of the webbed fingers kind of thing. So Man-at-Arms and Zodak were going to be the last release, and the idea was to do him based on the vintage figure. And here's where I kind of made one of my big, I'll call it boo-boos, or at least showing that I don't know as much about the brand as I thought I did. When the Horsemen turned in their sculpt, and I saw that it had furry sort of rings around the arms, my reaction was, whoa, guys, we're not doing 2000X. The whole point is to pull back and just do the vintage figure. Why did you sculpt all this hair and fur on the arms? And they were quick to point out that the vintage cross-sell art had the fur on the armor, on the arms. And I was like, oh, yeah, right. So from then on, I absolutely bowed to the Four Horsemen's knowledge of the MOTUC brand, because they did exactly what Classics was supposed to be. They sculpted the armor the way, the ultimate way the vintage line was, based on the cross-sell. So, yeah, I felt really dumb on that. But again, so here's all the armor. He had a pile of armor, lots and lots of pieces, and they did an amazing job with the back panel, especially, since you could clip all the armor into there. Alright, so let's also talk about that sword that he came with. So in 2000X, Skeletor had this sword that split into two and had two halves. It had a light side and a dark side. It's like the Force. It binds the universe together. An upside and a downside, as Yogurt says. And in the 2000X line, the sword split in half. And if you look very carefully at the hilt, actually this is the Classics version of that, and this is not it either. This is just Keldor holding two halves of the power sword. But if you look at both sides of the 2000X sword, you will see one has like a light side sun and one has a dark side moon. And this was delivered from the Horsemen. What this was supposed to be, from the Horsemen's original pitch for 2000X He-Man, before Mike Young came along, the production studio that did the animated series, the Four Horsemen had their own storyline that they proposed for 2000X. And what this was the idea that Skeletor and He-Man had kind of like their final battle. And it took place after Filmation was over. It was going to continue the story post-Filmation. So, like what was going to happen next. And the idea was that Skeletor, after, this, big battle with He-Man, had become king of all Eternia. And he stole He-Man's sword, and he took it. And so he had both sides of the power sword. It was basically paying homage to the original mini-comics, where the original mini-comics had two swords, like a light side and a dark side, that had to come together. And when you brought both swords together, that was what allowed you to have the key to Castle Grayskull, to enter the castle. And so the Horsemen wanted to incorporate this idea of combining the two swords. And then the idea that Skeletor now took the sword, and he had both sides of it, which basically left He-Man without a sword. Okay, there you go. There's the 2000X sword, so you can see, half of it. That's the dark side version. So with Skeletor in possession of both sides of the sword, and I'm sorry this picture's so blurry. I was trying to find a better picture. I don't have my 2000X line anymore. I sold that off years ago, before I started doing classics. But anyway, so I had to kind of try to find images online. Sorry about that. All right. So He-Man doesn't have a sword anymore. So the idea was that Man-at-Arms was going to build him a new power sword that would also harmonize with the power of Grayskull. So that's why the 2000X sword is all techno and machine and, got the rivets and electronics. So basically, because He-Man lost his sword to Skeletor, he needed a replacement. And this was the one Man-at-Arms made for him with the help of the Sorceress, to replace his sword until he could get it back. And you'll see that kind of come out in the bios for MOTUC Classics, too. All right, another thing with Man-at-Arms, obviously, his 2000X gun. I really wanted to do this with the figure, but we just could not afford it. It was basically do the gun or do two heads. And it made a lot more sense to do two heads because the whole Filmation mustache, no mustache, old figure, not having a mustache. If you want to kind of know more about, the 2000X heads and, why we didn't do those, there's a whole video about the 2000X and, how they're basically two artistic interpretations of the same original vintage figure. So go watch that video and you'll hear all about that. So that's basically why we didn't do a 2000X head, although I don't think there really was kind of a stylized head. Doing the unmasked head, or the unhelmeted head, which we eventually did, was also another thing I really wanted to do, and we finally got to that years later. And I guess I'll talk about that when we get to that figure. All right, wrapping up Man-at-Arms, one of the last issues to address was the Rubbery Mace. His mace was kind of more bendy than fans wanted it to be, and there actually is a production reason for this. It wasn't just because we wanted to give him kind of a wimpy mace. It's all about tooling. So when you tool, you have to use the same type of plastic material. And the mace was tooled in the same part that had all of the armor. We couldn't afford to tool the mace in its own tool to give it harder plastic. So basically, because it was included in the armor tool, it had the same plastic as the armor, which had to be a little bendy in order to fit around him. To fit around the arms and the legs and the little straps to work, needed to be a little more gummy. So that's why the mace was gummy, because it was with the same tool as the armor. And that's pretty much Man-at-Arms in a nutshell. His gummy mace, his multiple heads, why he came with the power sword for He-Man, because he made it in the bios and in 2000X to replace Skeletor's sword. And yeah, Man-at-Arms was definitely a great figure, and with all the different versions we did over the years, you could really mix and match and kind of make the ultimate version you wanted with different types of armor, different colors, different heads, and I love the way everything snapped into the back. The Horsemen really outdid themselves, and they made me look like an idiot because I didn't know my stuff. Well, okay, maybe not an idiot, but they definitely proved that they were the true masters of the universe.